Well, good morning and welcome once again to Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training, and this is my twice weekly webcast on Sundays and Wednesdays. Goes up at 11, nearly always live, occasionally recorded, very, very rarely I miss a show. Hopefully the audio is coming over. I had stuttery music again. I don't know why that is. I will try changing the location of the music file or something, see if I can't improve that, but hopefully the audio is coming over okay to you. Sue and Kevin have both looked in. Good to see you both. Right, so what have we got for you today? Fairly packed show. It's going to be a reasonably short one though, as I need to get on with things this afternoon. ULEZ is running into trouble. Essex have banned putting up the signs. Gig economy riders work in dangerous conditions, according to an IAM survey, but the same survey showed that most of those people who thought they were riding in dangerous conditions were still perfectly happy to order food to be delivered to their door. A blood test is under development in Australia for drowsy riders. Apparently they are looking to use that to test people after a crash in Australia. Spain has installed some cameras monitoring stop junctions to make sure that drivers actually do stop. Rather sadly, the Isle of Man's Southern 100 event had to be abandoned after a double fatality. We'll have a quick look at the new 700cc 4-cylinder sports bike from the Chinese manufacturer Benda, and then we'll finish up today by carrying on looking at the topic that I've been going over for several weeks now. Started off by looking at Warwickshire's placement of Think Bike and Ride Safe signs, and today we'll look at the need for those signs to be evidence-based, and we'll look at how Dock Bike are going about it down in Dorset. So settle yourselves down for the next 30 minutes or so, whilst I just make sure that everything's all right. Yes, Kevin says audio's okay. Good, right, excellent. So, well, the good news is it is a rather calmer morning than yesterday. It's fluffy white clouds out there, still breezy, but yesterday it was so windy that I was out on the bike about 11:30 or so, and I was dodging wheelie bins and rubbish sacks being blown across the road, and I actually got hit whilst I was on the off the bike, carrying my helmet in my hand. I managed to get hit on the head by a small branch that came off a tree that was right down the middle of Kensington actually, so it really was quite breezy yesterday. So hopefully if anybody's out on the bike today, take it easy. It will be a bit breezy still. Weather looking up, I hope, next week. Now, I'll just start by reminding you about the weekly digest, which goes out on my Substack channel. Here is the address for that. If you want to sign up for the newsletter, do drop me a line through that. You won't get any spam, and you can now unsubscribe, of course, at any time. And last week, amongst the things you might have missed, was there was a post on Saturday in my Skills on Saturday regular, which was all about upskilling the roundabout way and basically looking at diesel, as the investigation that I've been doing into bike crash locations has thrown up roundabouts as a significant problem, somewhat unbeknownst to me, I must be honest. Diesel is the obvious starting point, so we looked at that on Saturday. On Friday I continued my long series into which covers psychology of riding really, and I was looking at whether or not we are competent or only skilled, and what I was looking at was, if I remember correctly, it was outcome goals. I've forgotten myself what I actually wrote about, but it was the need basically to have a focus on where we work on our riding, and the key points really are that there's a lot of mental stuff in riding, and that's what it was about, objective orientation. So knowing what you want to achieve works backwards to direct how we achieve it, something that we tend to forget sometimes. 60-second science on Thursday. That was all about talk and explaining why talk, as in TORQUE, is so important. And it's the first of several videos that I'll be doing on that topic. It didn't get many hits, possibly because I actually put the wrong link into one of the distribution channels, but that is available on YouTube. And what else do we have? Yes, getting started. Riding and alcohol on Tuesday, my Tips on Tuesday series. Something we're supposed to teach on CBT is the problems of alcohol and drugs and medicines. But alcohol sometimes gets overlooked as a cause of motorcycle crashes. We tend to be relatively good at not getting onto a bike after a few beers here in the UK, but the same can't be said for the US. So interesting article there, because it gives you some insight into how people actually think about alcohol when they're riding. So back to Monday, July the 10th. This was the question, where are the real powered two-wheeler hotspots for crashes? And that was where the roundabout data came out. And so that's what's gone by in the previous week. Do have a look at that and sign up for that newsletter, and you'll get those all delivered to your inbox so you can read everything in your own time. And don't forget, if you've got comments, questions, anything you want to say, I'm more than happy to hear that, and I'll try to get back to you, of course, during the show. Right, so with that in mind, let's get on with the news. Now, the ULEZ row here in London continues to rumble. The current ULEZ zone covers what's sometimes called inner London. It's between the North and South Circular Road, so actually quite a long way out of inner London in reality. But Transport for London, TfL, plans to extend the ultra low emission zone to cover all London boroughs from the end of August, which will take it out more or less to where the M25 runs. But a number of councils in the outlying areas have objected, and they cited a lack of consultation. What's happened now is they have forced a judicial review, the outcome of which is still being awaited. Now, it's expected that the judge in charge of proceedings is scheduled to deliver their judgment before the end of this month. So hopefully we will get some clarity on what's going on in the not too distant future. Meanwhile, this week, Essex Council passed a motion banning the placement of ULEZ expansion signs on Essex Council land and property, and they also prevented any existing signage in the county from being modified. Another problem that's been happening right across the outer London zone as the hardware is put in place to capture on camera people who are passing through the ULEZ zone. Many of the cameras are being vandalised. Some have just been unbolted and taken down completely. Others have been had their wires snipped, that sort of thing. So there is significant vandalism going on. So there are lots and lots of objections to the scheme. So why is it being proposed? Well, simple really. The extension is required to fund and upgrade the transport network in London, and generally speaking, and to upgrade public transport specifically. Now, the costs of keeping the essential transport running during the COVID shutdown forced TfL into the red, and that's what required the bailouts from central government. But, and this is where I will show my political bias perhaps, is because what I will say is that almost entirely ignored in the press debate, which is mostly from the right wing of course, is that the reason that TfL actually needs more money is that the cash injections themselves came with strict government conditions, including, for example, reducing pension costs for staff, the requirement to make capital investment for the future, such as new buses, new bus routes, and new trains as well to replace some of the rolling stock on the underground, which is getting on for 50 years old now. So that's what's driven the need for the London Authority to actually boost their income. So, question, what happens if the extension is suspended or even blocked completely by the judicial review? Well, it seems that TfL right at this moment don't have a plan B, as it was reported this week that one of the TfL's top officials admitted in a discussion with the London Assembly that the authorities not actually completed any financial contingency planning, which seems very, very surprising to me, but hey ho. So that could be why it's reported that in a session in the House of Commons on Wednesday this week, the existing plans to introduce a pay per mile or pay per minute roads pricing scheme, which has been on the cards as a sort of eventual upgrade to the ULEZ zones, that investigation into how that might work has been accelerated. So, okay, why do I keep coming back to ULEZ in London? Well, very simple. What happens in London will spread to the towns and cities out of the area. ULEZ zones have come in a lot of different places in the UK. I know one of the most hotly disputed is the one in Portsmouth, which actually covers the routes in to the dockside. So you have to drive through the ULEZ zone just to get a ferry out of Portsmouth. A lot of people aren't happy about that, I can tell you. Anyway, moving on, what else we got in the news for you? Well, the IAM have, the Institute of Advanced Motorists, they have commissioned a survey into what ordinary motorists think about the food delivery gig economy, and the results are actually quite interesting because they revealed that around 2/3 of the 2,000 respondents believed that it is unsafe for motorcyclists to deliver food in bad weather. In specifics, 2/3 said it was dangerous to deliver in snowy conditions, and a similar proportion felt that delivering in fog was dangerous, and almost half considered wet weather as another condition that was unsafe for motorcyclists. But here's a really interesting thing: less than half, just less than half, felt uncomfortable about ordering the food when the weather actually was snowy or foggy, and only a third were uncomfortable about putting in an order when it was raining. Now, what's come of this? Well, IAM RoadSmart have been using this to urge food delivery companies to introduce stronger measures, they say, to protect riders' safety. Neil Gregg, he's the Director of Policy and Research at IAM RoadSmart. He said that although public awareness of the risks faced by delivery drivers does not appear to have dampened demand, he said, quote, "Nearly half of our respondents are prepared to pay more to enhance safety conditions, which could remove the link between higher income for riskier jobs. Our survey proves that many consumers don't just want a quick meal delivered to their door, but they also want it delivered in an ethical manner which fully considers the safety of the rider." Well, all I can say to that is good luck with translating higher prices to higher earnings for the riders. He continued, "If we can have the conversation around appropriate training, PPE, working conditions and pay, together we can help develop a model that allows the industry to continue successfully and ultimately see motorcyclists put at less risk on our roads." So, I certainly see plenty of riders like this one in the picture. Let me just zoom in on that a little. There we go. And as you can see, the rider is equipped with no gloves and no trainers. So basically the helmet seems to be all they think they need. But the thing is, of course, that PPE only actually comes into play after a crash, and indeed, as Neil Gregg says, training would be better, I think, to prevent them from being interfacing with the tarmac in the first place. Now, these are the people, remember, who here in the UK have taken just a single day's training through what I consider to be a totally inadequate CBT scheme to ride around on L plates. Now, many, I would say, from simply observing these riders, they desperately need upskilling to prevent poor riding decisions I see every day as I ride or drive in London here. Now, out on the bike yesterday on my way to collect my phone, which I'd left at a restaurant in central London, one rider passed me at 30 miles an hour but on the inside. Now the thing was, there was nothing actually coming the other way. She could easily have gone around the outside of me and still overtaken me, and it would have been a lot safer. As it was, by passing up the near side, she was very close to parked car doors, and she finished the overtake straight through a junction on the near side where an emerging driver would have struggled to see her, thanks to the parked cars that she had squeezed tight to. Hopefully the driver would have seen me and not pulled out in front of her, but it certainly could have put the nose of the car in her way. Another overtook me and then tried to overtake the Uber, which was right directly in front of me, and that driver had been signalling a right turn for at least 50 metres, which was why I'd moved to the left so that I could pass up the inside. The rider was very lucky. The driver actually saw the motorcycle coming. So how do we improve the training of riders? Well, this is simple, straightforward, easy to apply step. You ban learner riders from working as delivery gig riders. Restricting the role to riders with a full motorcycle license will ensure they're actually good enough to pass the same test that's demanded of any other road user. It's nothing outrageous, yet there is a huge objections within the motorcycle industry generally to introducing any kind of obligation to pass the test. Now, enforcing a rule requiring delivery riders to have a full license would no doubt put a throttle on the number of gig economy bikers. And yes, that would make the delivery of food and other goods more expensive, but unless you're the kind of person who thinks that ordering a Costa coffee to arrive at the door at 8 a.m. to wake you up being a good way to start the day, I'm sure you'll all survive. Now, having thought about this actually for quite a few years now, I'd go a little bit further and actually make it a legal requirement to have held the license for 2 years before starting working as a courier. That's very similar, well, it is the same requirement basically before you can start becoming an instructor. Now, I don't want to stop people earning a crust from riding a bike. After all, I've been doing that myself for years, but arguably a big chunk of the current problem is that there are just too many riders competing for too few delivery jobs. That means miserable earnings, and that is what generates the ride like an idiot culture, because riders need to get jobs done as quickly as possible to put themselves back in the queue for the next job. And I recall that from courier days too. So turn things around. Restrict the supply of people who are actually willing to risk their life for a few pennies, and companies really would be forced to offer better terms to attract riders to work for them. I remember from my courier days that jobs with companies like the BBC, who put you on a salary rather than just sort of did the gig economy, they were very much sought after because they employed couriers under much better terms. BBC also supplied bikes too. So, with fewer gig riders on the road, one of the other big pluses, of course, is that you would also make it a lot easier to police, and you could check on the riders with no licenses, with no insurance, and those who are doing things like sharing identities. Right, so don't forget, set a reminder. The show goes out on Sundays and Wednesdays at 11, and you can, excuse me, I'll just stretch a little bit. You can always catch up with it on my YouTube channel, Survival Skills UK. Don't forget the all-important UK on the end there. Right, comment from Sue, who says, most delivery guys do not have full licenses. Absolutely, that is the problem. They are not, I think, qualified to do the job they're doing. As I said, I don't want to stop anybody doing a job, but you do, I think, to have some responsibility to be actually reasonably competent on the road before you start a job like this. Right, so, okay. Well, now, one of the problems with the gig economy and the poor wages, of course, is that riders are often working for extended periods. 10 or 12 hours at a stretch doesn't seem that uncommon, having read a few articles written by people who are complaining about how the gig economy works. But unlike the effects of alcohol, which you'll recall I talked about on Tuesday, riders are largely unaware of the effects of fatigue, despite at least a couple of decades of research that says operating when a vehicle is when you're tired is as dangerous as drink driving. Now, I remember having a fruitless discussion actually with an American rider who regularly rode from 6 in the morning till 8 in the evening on his holiday trips around the US. He liked to think that 600 miles a day was a sort of nice steady day's riding, and he was convinced that he could tell the difference between what he called ordinary tiredness from dangerous tiredness. Yeah, right. Okay, well, anyway, now researchers at Monash University in Australia are working on developing a blood test which actually measures whether a driver or motorcycle rider is impaired through lack of sleep. The team's early research in 2021 found that drivers with only 3 hours sleep are actually 10 times more likely to be involved in a crash than someone who is well rested. That's actually in line with what a friend of mine told me. She used to be a flight attendant, and she said that the most dangerous time for them was actually the drive home from the airport after a long shift on a plane. Now, working with drivers who were deliberately sleep deprived was what gave them this insight. What they did was they sent these drivers on 2-hour driving stints on a controlled track. They had a dual control vehicle with an instructor next to them ready to take control, and using that, Associate Professor Claire Anderson's team has identified 5 biomarkers in the blood, presumably chemicals, so that they can detect easily, and using these they can determine whether somebody has been awake for 24 hours or more with greater than 99% accuracy. That's pretty incredible, actually. So this blood test could be available in 2 years, and since the trial was developed in conjunction with the Victoria Government, Road Safety Victoria and the Victoria Police, I would expect it to be rolled out in that state in the Australia to test riders and drivers involved in crashes in the not too distant future. Right, okay, so what else have we got for you? Well, another interesting legal little quandrum. Have a look at this. I'm sure you'll recognise it. It's a stop sign. Unfortunately, a lot of us, and I have to admit sometimes I have done it to myself, we tend to treat a stop sign as an option. We'll have a good look, and if there's anything coming we'll stop, but if we can see it's clear, we'll tend to roll out of the stop junction without actually coming to a complete standstill. I actually got pulled up in France and given a ticking off once for doing that. But if you're doing it in Spain, you really do need to watch out from now on, because the country's Directorate General for Traffic, their DGT, has begun installing and testing new cameras which will be able to detect whether or not a vehicle has come to a complete stop or has performed a rolling halt at the stop sign. Now, the reason is that crash data from Spain suggests that failing to stop at stop junctions is actually quite common. It's on the rise, and it actually contributes significantly to the fatal crash toll in the country, as drivers treat stop signs as optional giveaway lines. Now, if you don't come to a complete halt, what happens? Well, a hefty fine of €20 may wing its way to your letterbox if you happen to have been caught on one of the new cameras. And something I will say is, don't be tempted to ignore it thinking you can get away with it post-Brexit, because that's Spain and we live in the UK. Although a fine from a UK country does not come to you automatically from the EU, the EU country can issue a request for payment. And even if you do get that, throwing the letter in the bin won't make it disappear either, because you can receive follow-ups. Fines almost certainly increase if you don't pay within the time frame allotted, and payments can be chased by debt collectors. Legally. So if you have copped a fine in a hire vehicle, you also may find it difficult to hire another one if you've got an unpaid fine on record. And lastly, if you're stopped by the police on a return visit to Spain, of course the unpaid fine and all the extra fines for unpaying the fine may well come to light. Right, okay, so don't forget, if you want to support me in these shows, I'm very happy if you do so. All you have to do is pop over to my coffee.com page and drop me a cuppa over there, and they all help me keep coming back and spending time putting these shows together for you. So your support is very welcome, and of course if you do go over to Coffee and buy me one, you don't go away empty-handed. You get access to a vast repository of back issues of my posts, tips on Tuesday, skills on Saturday. There's getting on for 1,000 of those now, plus a lot of other stuff and plenty of free stuff to read too. So pop over to Coffee and drop me a cuppa if you can support me. Right, next story, sad one really. The Isle of Man's historic Southern 100 road races were cancelled this week after a double fatality resulting from an incident on Tuesday evening. The Southern 100, which is in its 68th year, was due to conclude on Thursday after getting underway with practice on Mondays. Now, what happened, according to reports, is that a bike went into the crowd on Tuesday evening at the end of the superbike practice. 2 riders, a marshal and a spectator, were involved, and Manx police later confirmed that the experienced Republic of Ireland rider Alan Connor died at the scene, and 66-year-old Marshal Liam Clark from Wigan also lost his life in the incident. That was shortly before 7 p.m. on the Billaun circuit, which is down near Castletown. On Wednesday, the roads were still closed as the police carried out their investigation. So a statement from the organisers was issued, which said that investigation into the tragedy was a priority, and they stated, quote, following the serious incident that occurred during the final lap of last night's practice session, the Southern 100 can confirm that the remainder of the event is now cancelled. Detective Inspector Neil Craig, he's appealed to members of the public who may be able to assist to get in touch. He said the area was well attended by members of the public who were watching the races, and officers have already spoken to a number of people regarding what they saw. However, it is likely there are people who either witnessed what occurred or who have video footage of the incident itself who we yet to identify and make contact with. So I would therefore like to appeal to anyone who was present at the time and who feels they may be able to assist to make contact with us in the first instance at police headquarters. Now, as of Friday evening, the 2 other people who sustained injuries at the scene were still being treated in hospital. Okay, so on to the next section of the show, where we take a look at some of the new motorcycles which have appeared around the world. Now, over on my regular bike forum, the regulars have been bemoaning the lack of 600cc sports bikes. The only offering left really in that class is the perennial ZX6R, which has somehow been updated to pass the current Euro 5 standards, which came in at the beginning of 2021. And rather oddly, that was a task that all the other manufacturers abandoned. The R6, for example, is still available in the US, and it's available for track racing, I think, in the UK, but is no longer homologated for road use. Now, as to the 2-cylinder replacements, which we've seen from Honda and Suzuki recently, they were largely rated as underpowered, although frankly how anybody can say an 80 horsepower bike is underpowered is somewhat beyond me. But hey ho, issues of world domination aside, anything Chinese, of course, isn't even in the running for consideration as a proper bike on that forum. And that's despite really an increasing range of new machines from manufacturers such as CF Moto and QJ Motor, and the fact that many people are quite happy to accept bikes from the likes of Benelli, which is of course Italian owned and Chinese powered, as is the BMW 650 range, incidentally. Fact is, Chinese components are found in many of the major motorcycle manufacturers' bikes, and complete Chinese motorcycles are coming close or have matched Japanese or European standards. And so to Benda. I've featured their naked 4-cylinder 700, the LFS 700 before, and the brand has just released a new motorcycle using that engine. This is the FR 700. Horrible names. Let's just have a quick look at it. Apologies for the photo being a bit poor quality. There were no decent photos of this bike anywhere that I could find, but that is it. As you can see, the new model gets the full superbike treatment, full fairing. It mounts a pair of vertically stacked headlights. Apparently the low bars, relatively low bars, they clip on to the top of the forks. They're shielded by angular mirrors that look vaguely like wings, and you also get fairly high and rear set footrests on the machine. Now the 676 motor, which looks to be very similar to Honda's CB650R, which has led to a few questions about how Benda have developed it. It's a Revy 4-valve double overhead cam, and you get a very similar 94 horsepower at 11,000 RPM and peak torque of 63 Newton meters, which is 46 pounds-feet or feet-pounds, arriving at 8,500. So not dissimilar at all to the Honda CBR 600. What is different though is the rather unusual hybrid steel and aluminium frame. The backbone of that, the bright yellow bit, is tubular steel, and there are aluminium plates suspended from that which hang the engine. The swing arm is also aluminium as well. Now running equipment isn't no name. The inverted front fork carries a 17-inch wheel with radially mounted Brembo brakes attached, and the bike gets a Kawasaki 650 style offset monoshock supporting the rear 17-inch wheel, and both of these units are from KYB. The bike gets ABS, and word is that it's also got a radar system, although no details on that. So right now the bike is only available in China, but since their LFC 700 Custom is actually available in Europe at the moment, I wouldn't be too surprised to see that the bike will be available here at some point in the not too distant future. Right, okay, on to today's final element, the discussion point, the in-depth dive that I've been doing into road signs, the things that are put up by councils for Think Bike campaigns. I'll be carrying on with that. So some years ago I met Dr. Ian Mew on one of the first Biker Down courses, and he's the person behind the Doc Bike scheme. He is a medical doctor. He is been working on the helicopter down in Dorset, and he set up the organisation Doc Bike, who are working with Dorset Council as well as Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole local councils on their own Think Bike campaign. What they want to do is see what we can do to make motorcycle collision hotspots less of a risk to bikers. And the interesting point to me is that Doc Bike have been calling for what they term evidence-based signs. Here's an example of the sort of thing that they are putting up, so just pop that up on screen for you. There we go. Actually, let me just put that in bigger so that you can actually read it. There it is. So what it's saying basically is collision hotspot, think bike. And presumably you won't have two people in high-vis jackets standing by it all the time to make it more visible, but that basically is what you're getting for your money. So, okay, what can we say about that? Well, looking at the info on the Doc Bike website, they pose a pair of questions which are valuable questions to actually ask. The first is, what is the point of the road sign? And they explain, quote, we've worked with lots of people and organisations across Dorset to understand where and how bike collisions occur. Therefore, we have the power to 1. Help inform motorcyclists when an area is high risk for motorcycle collisions to be extra vigilant for other vehicles pulling out on them. 2. To help make other road users aware that a motorcycle collision hotspot and to take extra care and pay extra attention for motorcyclists at that particular location. And the second question is, what do the signs need to do? And again, their answer is quite informative really, because it says the only thing the signs really need to do is save lives, but they would like to do this in a way, it says, quote, which reminds us that we all share the roads with each other and encourages us to look out for each other. And to this end, Doc Bikes say they've teamed up with scientists to work out the best way to achieve this, and to be effective, signs have to be simple, easily identifiable, and to give all road users an awareness of the increased risk of there being a bike collision in that area, so that everyone can take this into account with their riding, driving, manoeuvring. Right, so far so good. So what have they come up with? Well, you've just seen one sign. Here's the other. Let me just get that up on screen for you. There it goes. So what can I say? Well, if I'm brutal, the Think Bike sign is nothing we haven't seen anywhere before. Perhaps slightly more catching design, but you know, it's exactly the same as what I've been talking about in recent episodes of Elevenses, and also writing about in the follow-up posts on Mondays on the my websites. So if you've missed those, do visit the Elevenses channel or head to my coffee pages. The links are in that description below. Doc Bike say these posters are evidence-based. Now, to be honest, what I'd like to see is some evidence that Think Bike posters actually do anything positive at all. Now, the fact is, Think Bike campaign, they're not just a few decades old, they are almost half a century old. And my own thinking, based on quite a lot of discussion with other riders really, is what they really end up doing is reinforcing the myth that drivers don't think and don't look for motorcycles, and that's what causes collisions at junctions. A couple of years back, a trainee who positioned far too close to a blind junction and had a near interface with the emerging vehicle was adamant that the issue was not the fact that she had positioned so close to the left that she couldn't be seen by the emerging driver. She was convinced that the driver, who physically couldn't see her because there was a hedge in the way, should somehow have looked harder. Now, you'll recall that the second sign the Warwickshire Road Safety Partnership put up was the one calling on riders to ride safe. Now, what on earth does ride safe actually mean? It's so vague, it's meaningless. What changes are riders supposed to make their riding safer? The fact is that very few riders actively court risks, knowing that they are taking a risk. In our internal worldview, we're in control of the situation. The fact is, the vast majority of crashes, at the moment that in time that things went wrong, each of us was making what we believed to have been a reasonable decision about what we were doing. No one sets out on a ride with the intention of never coming home. So yeah, we may look backwards at the outcome of our choices after the event, and we may say to ourselves that was stupid, but that perspective on our risky riding is almost always only available after the event. And the same applies to collision investigations. In fact, they work from an outside in looking backwards perspective, not an inside out looking forwards perspective, to see how the rider and the driver, if it's a collision, viewed the situation in the run up to the crash. So yeah, I do think that this second sign saying "have you been seen" is a rather better one, because it asks a direct question that the rider has to hopefully come up with an answer to, because it puts you in a position to think about what you're doing. You'll either think, yeah, I'm in the best possible position to see and be seen, or actually, I hadn't considered whether or not a driver could see me from the junction ahead, and perhaps I better do something to change my position. So the only problem I see with these is, are they in the right place? Where is the evidence for that? And you'll recall that the Somerset Road Safety Partnership said that they were putting their signs up in the places where they were needed according to their own evidence. Now, my analysis of the data from the collision plot website, which allowed me to look at a decade's worth of crash data on 2 of the roads which they considered for their campaign, suggested very firmly that that was not the case. They dismissed the road with a lot of collisions, saying it didn't need think bike signs, and they targeted the roads with almost no motorcycle crashes with their ride safe signs. So the evidence I see suggests that those signs went in the wrong place. The best I could come up with was that they were putting them where a lot of traffic passed. Now, you'll recall that I said that DocBike said they were working with lots of people and organisations across Dorset to understand how where bike collisions occur. Now, it would be baffling to me if the Warwickshire road safety people didn't have the same sort of access. So all I can hope is that DocBike signs are actually going up in places where they make sense to drivers and riders. I don't have that information about where they're being located, so it'd be interesting to know where they are and use that collision plot data to actually track what has happened previously on those roads. And better yet, I think we could spend rather more time actually teaching riders themselves to start looking proactively for road signs warning about junctions, generally the triangular warning signs that we have scattered around the country, and actually just looking for gaps in hedges where vehicles could emerge. Right, that is it for today. As always, comments on the content always welcome. What do you think about these road signs? Do you think that Think Bike, or have you been seen signs, will make any difference to your riding? Do you think it'll make any difference to drivers driving? Let me know what you think and feed it back to me, and I'll be able to talk about that. I'll discuss it in comments with you when you do. Right, that is the end of today's show. So, as always, thank you very much indeed for spending your half hour or so with me. It's always very much appreciated when people look in. If you're here later on today or at some point in the future, again, thank you for looking in, and I will certainly hope to see you soon. And if you are out there today on the bike, bear in mind that the weather is still a bit breezy. I haven't looked at the forecast for other parts of the country, but certainly it's still pretty windy down here in the southeast. So if you are out there on 2 wheels, make sure that you stay shiny side up.